Welcome to the deep dive. Our goal here is always pretty straightforward. We take a whole bunch of source material, pull out the absolute key insights, and basically give you a shortcut to getting up to speed. And this one, well, it's tailored for you. Today, we're really plunging into a critical global conversation, Africa's future, our source material. It's from a pretty insightful YouTube video transcript. It's called Africa's Future at War, Kagame, Traore, Malema, Lumumba, and Arikana, Clash Over the Way Forward, comes from the Afro Roots and Realities channel. And they promise, quote, no hype, no hate, just context, clarity, and the voices they don't want you to hear. At its heart, the source really asks this fundamental question: who is Africa for? It points out that, these influential voices, they do not agree, they do not speak alike, but they all ask the same question.
That's absolutely right. And what's really fascinating, I think, is how these different perspectives, even though they clash, they all kind of circle back to that one central question. So, yeah, we're going to unpack the main areas of debate here. That ongoing push for unity, the whole idea of redefining democracy, what it even means to be African today, and crucially, that quest for economic sovereignty. So what is all these competing visions, what does it mean for Africa's place in the world? Let's get into it.
Okay, so with that mission set, let's dive into the first really big area shaping this whole debate. Unity. It's been central to the conversation in Africa for decades, hasn't it? Our source kicks things off with this powerful idea that Africa needs to, quote, wake up, realize it's just as good as anybody else, capable of playing the big boy game. But it's not just about how others see Africa, is it? The source says it also needs a conversation with the image in the mirror, a need to decolonize ourselves.
Yeah, that point about decolonizing oneself, it's really deep. The source argues pretty strongly that Africa hasn't managed to unite because of that old rule, divide and conquer. And they trace that seed right back to the Berlin Conference, 1884-85, when European powers basically just carved up the map, drew lines, often ignoring who actually lived there, right?
Right. Without regard for existing communities.
Exactly. And the source argues those divisions, sown back then, they're still hindering unity now. They create this feeling of inferiority sometimes, maybe at the negotiating table, while others feel, superior. It's a really deep-seated thing that needs tackling from within.
Yeah, it definitely shows the internal and external hurdles. And the call for unity is just incredibly strong in the source material. Seeing yourself in every African, doesn't matter if they're Zimbabwean or Mozambican, it really hammers home we are one people, and those borders were imposed on us by the colonizers.
So the question isn't really if Africa should unite. It seems more like under what vision, and maybe more pointedly, led by whom.
Yeah.
That seems to be where the sparks fly, given how diverse the continent is.
Precisely. And this is where the source adds a really critical warning, a sort of caveat. It says, unity alone is not enough because unity without power is a house built on sand. This isn't just, abstract talk. It's a pretty stark, practical point. The source is basically saying that unity, if it doesn't actually translate into real political clout, real economic leverage, well, it just becomes this fragile idea, easily broken by outside pressures or, internal splits. It makes you ask, okay, what actual power would this unity bring, and how would that power be used? Okay, so unity isn't the destination, maybe. It's the vehicle, the way to get power. That definitely shifts the focus. It's not just an ideal, it's strategic. And that leads us, I think, straight into the next big contested idea, what democracy even means for Africa. The source throws out a really provocative statement right away. Democracy is not elections, but human rights. It notes, Africa votes, sure, but does Africa rule? Wow, that immediately makes you question, the substance versus just the ceremony of governing.
It absolutely challenges the common view, doesn't it? And the source really gets into some sharp critiques of how democracy is often, practiced or maybe imposed on the continent. It points to voices asking how people who call themselves Democrats can, impose democracy by killing millions or block people from entering their own parliaments or even use armed forces to invade assemblies. And they explicitly contrast that kind of behavior with those they call plotters.
That's a really stark criticism. It suggests a kind of hypocrisy, maybe, in how democracy gets defined and pushed globally sometimes. The source even talks about what it calls incompetence. Some African leaders, it says, cling to the definition imperialism gave them, but they never really grasp its foundations. That's a strong charge, a disconnect between the systems they have and maybe genuine understanding or buy-in.
And what's really interesting there is the call to action that follows. It's about needing to seek understanding, gain knowledge, observe the world, and redefine democracy as we want it here in Africa. So it's not throwing out the idea of good government, not at all. It's more like a demand for an African definition, one that fits its own context, its own goals. It also brings up this idea that there is no such thing as individual freedom, arguing instead that freedom is collective as long as we live in society with rules. Ultimately, the source lands here. The debate isn't really about democracy, it's about legitimacy.
Right. Legitimacy. So the source is arguing the real test isn't just did an election happen. It's do the people governed actually see the government as legitimate? That shifts the whole basis of political power, doesn't it? From just procedure to, well, popular acceptance. That's a big difference. But okay, moving beyond politics, the source gets into something even deeper, maybe. Identity. What does it actually mean to be African in, say, 2025? It looks at this really profound statement. You are an African not because you were born in Africa, but because Africa is born in you. That kind of expands Pan-Africanism, that whole idea of a united, independent Africa, to include everyone, right? Africans both in the continent and in the diaspora. It stresses this shared identity, shared destiny, no matter where you were born.
Yeah, and it's not just presented as some, romantic idea. The source really insists on giving this new Pan-Africanism practical teeth, real meaning. So what does this vision mean on the ground? Well, things like achieving self-sufficiency in farming, like having peace, quiet, tranquility across the continent, and importantly, positioning Africa to really benefit from things like the fourth and fifth industrial revolutions, AI, for example. The goal seems to be making sure African nations are creators, innovators, not just, consumers of whatever tech comes along, building digital wealth in Africa.
That's where it gets really concrete, isn't it? This vision means stopping young people from ending up in, quote, latter-day Slava in the Arab world, or, facing humiliation at Western embassies, or being stuck in low-wage jobs like flip a hamburger and work at McDonald's in Europe and America. It sounds like it's about dignity, self-respect, real opportunities. The call is for a different Pan-Africanism, and the source basically says the choice is yours to follow a path that puts African well-being first.
And that desire for self-determination, for well-being, it links straight into the final and maybe the most critical battleground, economic sovereignty. The source points out that massive contradiction. Africa is rich in gold, coltan, oil, and uranium, but somehow we are poor. That paradox, all this natural wealth, but widespread poverty among the people, it's at the absolute core of so many of Africa's challenges, historically and today. It's a story we hear about globally, but it feels particularly sharp here.
It really does. And it makes you ask, well, if the resources are there, what exactly, according to the source, has stopped them from benefiting Africans? The demand from these voices seems crystal clear. We want the resources of Africa to benefit the people of Africa. Not the West, not the East, not those who come outside Africa. The aim is to, quote, help Africans to get their land, to get their minerals, and use their minerals for the survival of African continent. It's about control, basically. Because, like the saying goes, who controls the money controls the future.
That's exactly right. And that control, in its ultimate form perhaps, extends to this idea of a truly unified economic vision. The source wraps up this section talking about this, aspirational goal of a single African currency, maybe called the Afro.
Yeah.
Imagine that replacing the whole patchwork we see now, currencies like the CFA franc, which, let's be honest, many see as a lingering colonial tie, especially to France. But also the Liberian dollar, the cedi, naira, birr, shilling, kwanza, mitash, the rand, all of them. This isn't just about making trade easier, is it? It's a massive statement of self-determination, a clean break from old economic dependencies, a single financial future for the whole continent.
So, okay, we've walked through these really powerful visions for Africa's future. Sometimes they clash, sometimes they seem to overlap a bit. The source reminds us these voices aren't just echoes, they're frames, ways of understanding where the continent might be headed. They do not agree, they do not speak alike, but they all ask the same question. Who is Africa for?
And that really leaves us and you, the listener, with that big unanswered question for the source. Which vision will win? Which future will rise? This material, it definitely challenges how we might typically think about unity or democracy or identity. It asks us to look past the standard definitions. So given all these diverse, passionate viewpoints, what responsibility does the wider world, and maybe what responsibility do you have in truly understanding Africa's push for self-determination, for a future defined by its own people? That's definitely a question worth thinking about long after this deep dive is over.